The torrential Seattle rain washed away the city grime, yet it could not scrub off the veneer of my perfect 10-year marriage. Stepping into the velvet bean for shelter, I froze. There was Julian, my husband, with a young redhead curled on his lap, his hand caressing her hair. God has a cruel sense of humor. Instead of screaming, I ordered a double espresso and silently plotted the most brutal destruction the West Coast elite had ever seen. My name is Victoria Vance, and at 32 years old, I have built a reputation in Seattle as the person you call when your life is burning down. I fix disasters. I manage crises for the city's elite. I spin narratives until the truth is just a matter of perspective. But standing in the doorway of the velvet bean, dripping wet from a sudden downpour that felt like the sky was weeping specifically for me, I realized I had missed the smoke signals rising from my own home. The rain outside was relentless, hammering against the pavement, but inside the cafe, the air was warm, smelling of roasted beans and cinnamon. It was the kind of intimate, dimly lit place lovers went to hide from the world. And hiding they were. My eyes swept the room, seeking an empty table, but they snagged on a corner booth shielded by a large, leafy potted fern. There sat Julian, my husband, the man who had kissed me goodbye this morning and told me he had a site visit in Bellevue. He was not in Bellevue. He was here, and he was not alone. A girl sat on his lap. She could not have been more than 22. A vibrant splash of color in the dreary afternoon. A cascade of fiery red hair tumbled down her back, contrasting sharply against Julian's charcoal suit, the suit I had bought him for our anniversary. She was laughing, her head thrown back, exposing a pale throat that Julian was currently tracing with his thumb. They looked sickeningly happy. They looked like a couple in a romantic comedy, oblivious to the audience watching them. They were wrapped in a bubble of intimacy that excluded the rest of the universe. Especially me. A normal wife would have screamed. A normal wife would have marched over there, grabbed that girl by her red hair, and caused a scene that would end up on social media within 10 minutes. But I am not a normal wife. I am Victoria Vance. I felt the initial stab, a physical blow to the chest that knocked the breath out of me. But then my professional training took over. The tears did not come. The rage did not explode outward. Instead, a cold, metallic calm settled over my entire being. I analyzed the situation as if it were a client's dossier. Subject Julian, incident adultery, status catastrophic failure. I did not move forward. I stepped to the side, near the barista station, and pulled out my phone. I adjusted the exposure, ensuring the lighting was perfect, and hit record. The lens captured everything in crystal clear 4K resolution. I zoomed in without shaking. I caught the way her hand rested on his chest. I caught the way he leaned in to whisper something against her ear that made her giggle. I captured the evidence of 10 years of loyalty being incinerated in real time. 1 large latte for table 4, a barista called out. Then, chaos ensued. A waiter rushing past the counter slipped on a wet patch from someone's dripping umbrella. The sound was deafening in the cozy space. Metal hit ceramic. Glass shattered against the hardwood floor. Crash! The noise cut through the ambient jazz and the lovers' whisperings like a gunshot. Naturally, everyone turned to look, including Julian. He jerked his head up, his instincts sharp, and his eyes swept the room. They landed on the source of the noise, and then they traveled just a few feet to the right. They landed on me. Time seemed to stop. I watched the blood drain from his face so fast I thought he might faint right there in the booth. He went rigid. The hand that had been caressing the girl's waist turned into a claw, gripping the fabric of her dress in a spasm of terror. He looked like a deer staring down the barrel of a rifle. The girl, sensing his sudden tension, looked up at him, confused. "Julian," she asked, her voice carrying across the silent room. She followed his gaze, but she did not know me. She just saw a woman in a trench coat standing by the counter, holding a phone. But Julian knew. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He was frozen, trapped in the headlights of his own destruction. I did not blink. I locked eyes with him, and then, slowly, deliberately, I let the corners of my mouth curve up. It was my boardroom smile, the smile I gave to politicians right before I told them how much it would cost to bury their scandals. I lifted the paper cup I had just purchased, a mock toast to his audacity. Without a word, I turned on my heel. I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped back into the deluge. The rain felt different now. It felt cleansing. I walked to my Porsche Panamera parked at the curb, the engine roaring to life the moment I pressed the start button. Through the rain-streaked window of the cafe, I saw frantic movement. Julian was scrambling, trying to push the girl off his lap, knocking over his own chair in his haste. Victoria. Wait. Victoria. Please. I imagined him shouting those words, though the thick glass and the pounding rain drowned him out. He was fighting his way through the crowded tables, shoving past the confused girl who was now standing up, looking hurt and bewildered. I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb just as the cafe door burst open behind me. I did not look back. I merged into the traffic, the wipers slashing rhythmically against the windshield. I was not going home to cry. I was going home to prepare for war. Julian thought he was merely having an affair. What he did not realize was that he had just signed his own death warrant. My company, Vance Strategy, operates on a simple, brutal premise: perception is reality, and reality is malleable. For the past decade, I have been the woman standing between powerful men and the consequences of their own stupidity. When a senator gets caught with an intern, or a tech CEO tweets something racist at 3 a.m, they call me. I do not offer tea and sympathy. I offer non-disclosure agreements and carefully curated press releases. I am a machine of efficiency, a woman who has surgically removed her ability to panic. And yet, as I steered my Porsche through the rain-slicked streets of Seattle, I realized the greatest PR fraud I had ever pulled off was my own marriage. Julian, my husband, the architect, or rather, the visionary designer. As I had branded him in the press releases I ghostwrote for his firm. The truth was far less glossy. Julian was a mediocre talent with a fragile ego, a man who designed guest houses while his wife built empires. I had always known he resented my success, the way my bank account dwarfed his, the way the waiter always handed me the wine list. I thought I was being a supportive wife by shrinking myself to fit into his passenger seat. I bought the suits that made him look successful. I introduced him to the developers who gave him pity contracts. I constructed the pedestal he stood on. And today, he used that height to spit in my face. As the windshield wipers slapped back and forth, the red flags I had ignored for months began to wave frantically in my memory. The emergency site visits on Saturday nights. The faint, cloying scent of vanilla body spray on his shirts too cheap for me, too sweet for him. The sudden obsession with his caloric intake and the new gym membership he claimed was for his health. I had diagnosed these symptoms in a dozen clients before. Why had I missed them in my own bed? Because I was arrogant. I assumed Julian was too dependent on my approval to risk losing it. I treated him like a safe asset, a bond that matured slowly but never defaulted. I was wrong. I tapped the screen of my car's console, declining Julian's 23rd call. He was panicking. Good. Panic makes people sloppy. I felt a strange, cold shift in my chest. The heartbreak was there, certainly, burying itself deep like a piece of shrapnel, but it was being encased by something harder. I was switching into work mode. Julian was no longer my husband. He was a rogue element in a high-stakes merger. He was a crisis to be managed. But usually, I managed crises to save the client. This time, I was the client, and the strategy was total scorched earth. I dialed a number I knew by heart. Vance. A gravelly voice answered. It was Marcus, a private investigator who usually dug up dirt on my client's enemies. I just sent you a video file, I said, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor that was vibrating in my hands. I need a full background check on the redhead. Name, address, family connections, financial status. I want to know what she eats for breakfast and who she owes money to. Consider it done. Who is the target, the girl in the video? And Marcus, keep this off the books. Understood. I hung up and pulled into the driveway of our lakeside villa. The house was dark. I walked inside, kicked off my Louboutins, and went straight to the shower. I scrubbed my skin until it was raw, washing away the rain and the feeling of contamination. Then I went to the kitchen. I did not pack a bag. I did not burn his clothes. Instead, I opened a bottle of Cabernet and took 2 thick ribeye steaks out of the fridge. I seasoned them with sea salt and cracked pepper. I heated the cast iron skillet until it smoked. The domesticity of it was perverse. I was setting the stage for a play he did not know he was starring in. An hour later, the front door creaked open. Julian stumbled in. He was drenched, his expensive suit ruined, his hair plastered to his skull. He looked like a drowned rat. His eyes darted around the living room, wild and terrified, until they landed on me. I was sitting at the dining table, the candles lit, 2 plates of steak and asparagus perfectly arranged. Victoria. He breathed my name like a prayer. He took a step forward, his hands shaking as he reached out, then pulled back. Victoria. Baby. Please. I can explain. The traffic was a nightmare, and my phone died. And he was rambling, layering lies on top of panic. It was pathetic. I picked up my steak knife and fork. The metal scraped softly against the china. I cut a precise triangular piece of meat, the center a perfect, bloody rare. I put it in my mouth, chewed slowly, and swallowed. I looked at him, my eyes wide and innocent, the picture of a loving wife waiting for her husband. Sit down, darling, I said, my voice smooth as silk. The steak is getting cold. He froze, confusion warring with fear on his face. He didn't know what to do. Was I crazy? Did I have amnesia? He slowly pulled out his chair and sank into it, water dripping from his jacket onto the hardwood floor. I took a sip of wine, watching him over the rim of the glass. I waited until he picked up his fork, his hand trembling so hard the silverware clattered against the plate. So, I said, smiling that bright, terrifying smile I saved for boardrooms. The coffee at the Velvet Bean seems delicious, doesn't it? The sound of the knife hitting the plate was the only warning before Julian was on the floor. He scrambled out of his chair and fell to his knees beside me, grasping for my hand like a sinner begging a priest for absolution. Victoria, please, you have to listen to me, he stammered, his eyes wet with tears that looked suspiciously rehearsed. It was just a moment of weakness. She is nobody, just a stupid intern at the firm. She came on to me, and I was stressed about the new project, and I didn't know how to say no. I did not pull my hand away. I let him hold it, my skin crawling at his touch, but my mind was recording every word like a court stenographer. Intern, seduction, moment of weakness. An intern, I asked, my voice flat. Yes, just a summer hire. Her name is Sienna. It means nothing. Victoria. I swear on my mother's life. It is over. I will fire her tomorrow. Just, please don't leave me. I looked down at him, dissecting his panic. He was terrified, yes, but not just of losing me. He was terrified of losing the safety net, the mansion, and the status. I nodded slowly, offering him a sliver of hope to hang himself with. Go shower, Julian, I said softly. You smell like rain and cheap choices. He scrambled up, sobbing his gratitude, believing he had dodged the bullet. He had no idea the bullet was still in the chamber, and I was just taking my time aiming. The next morning, the truth arrived in my inbox with an innocent ping. I sat in my home office, sipping black coffee, as I opened the dossier Marcus had sent. The subject line was simply, "The Redhead." I clicked the attachment. The first line made me laugh out loud, a harsh, dry sound in the quiet house. Name Sienna Harrison. Age 22. Sienna was not an intern. She was the youngest daughter of Arthur Harrison, the CEO of the Harrison Real Estate Group. The same Harrison Group that Julian's firm had been desperate to sign for the new waterfront development project for 6 months. My blood ran cold, then hot. This was not just a midlife crisis. This was a transaction. Julian was not just cheating on me, he was using his body to secure a contract. He was sleeping with the client's daughter to bypass the bidding process. It was disgusting, but I had to admit, it was almost Machiavellian in its stupidity. I scrolled down. The next piece of information hit me like a physical blow. Status engaged to Patrick Sterling, son of Senator Sterling. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking. This changed everything. This was no longer just a domestic dispute. This was a political scandal waiting to happen. A marriage between the Harrison money and the Sterling political influence was a merger of power in this state, and my idiot husband was the wrench in the gears. If this affair leaked, it would not just ruin Julian, it would humiliate the Harrison family and potentially derail a senatorial campaign. I was holding a nuclear bomb. My initial instinct to throw his clothes on the lawn vanished. If I divorced him now, loudly and publicly, the collateral damage would be immense, but I might lose leverage. Julian needed to feel safe. He needed to believe he had successfully lied to me so that he would lower his guard. I closed the laptop and picked up my phone. I dialed my personal attorney, a shark named Eleanor who made me look warm and fuzzy. "Eleanor," I said when she answered, "I need to restructure the assets. Immediately. Is this about the rumors she asked?" "It is about survival," I replied. "I want to move the liquid assets from the joint accounts into the Vance Family Trust today and freeze the supplementary Amex Black Card. Tell him it is a security flag if he asks." "Understood. What is the timeline?" "Yesterday," I said, and Eleanor drafted the papers. "But do not file them yet. I have a few more pieces to move on the board." I walked out of the office and found Julian in the kitchen, making toast. He looked tentative, watching my face for signs of anger. "Morning," he said, his voice small. I meant what I said last night. I'm going to fix this." I walked over and straightened his tie, smoothing the silk with a proprietary air. "I know you will, Julian," I lied, looking him dead in the eye. "We have a lot of work to do." Exactly 1 week later. The silence in our house was not peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in our master bedroom, fastening a diamond necklace that cost more than Julian's annual salary. He sat on the edge of the bed, fumbling with his cufflinks, his face a mask of misery. "Victoria, I really don't think I should go," he said, his voice tight. "My stomach is in knots. I feel like I might throw up. Maybe it is food poisoning or—" "Nonsense," I interrupted, smoothing the black velvet of my gown. "The Children's Hospital Gala is the event of the season. Everyone who matters will be there. If you stay home, people will talk. They will whisper that the perfect marriage of the celebrated architect Julian Vance is cracking." "Is that what you want?" He flinched. He knew the answer. In our world, rumors were more damaging than facts. He stood up, his legs unsteady, and finished dressing. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. The ballroom at the Fairmont was a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, smelling of expensive perfume and old money. I took Julian's arm, feeling the tremor in his bicep. I steered him through the crowd like a captain navigating a ship through a minefield. My eyes scanned the room and locked onto our target immediately. The Harrisons. Arthur Harrison was holding court near the champagne fountain, laughing loudly. Beside him stood Sienna. She looked breathtaking in a silver dress that clung to her youth like a second skin, and next to her, holding her hand with possessive pride, was Patrick Sterling. He was the golden boy, handsome, wealthy, and destined for the Senate. "Oh, God," Julian whispered, stopping dead in his tracks. "Victoria, please, let's go the other way." "Don't be rude, darling," I said, my grip on his arm tightening until my nails dug into his suit jacket. "We must say hello. Arthur is your biggest potential client. Remember, I dragged him forward." As we approached, Sienna looked up. Her eyes went wide, and the color drained from her face so fast she looked like a ghost in couture. She recognized me from the cafe, or maybe she just recognized the terror radiating off my husband. "Arthur, it is wonderful to see you." I beamed, extending my hand. "Victoria and the genius architect himself." Arthur boomed, shaking Julian's limp hand. I turned my gaze to Sienna. "And this must be your lovely daughter, and her fiancé. What a stunning couple. You two remind me of Julian and myself 10 years ago. Young, ambitious, and so full of hope." Julian looked like he was about to faint. He stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Sienna was trembling slightly, clutching her champagne flute with white-knuckled desperation. "It is a pleasure to meet you," Patrick said, oblivious to the tension. "We are big fans of Julian's work." "Thank you," I replied smoothly. "Julian is very passionate about his work. He puts his heart and soul into every project. Sometimes he gets so involved, he forgets where the boundaries are." "Isn't that right?" Honey Julian made a choking sound. Sienna flinched so hard her hand jerked and the crystal flute tilted. Red wine splashed across the front of her silver dress, a dark, spreading stain that looked like a gunshot wound. "Oh no," she gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "I'm so sorry accidents happen," I said soothingly, stepping in before anyone else could react. "Come with me, dear. Let's get you cleaned up. Men, stay here and talk business." I ushered a paralyzed Sienna toward the ladies' room, leaving Julian standing alone with her father and her fiancé. I could feel his panic radiating across the ballroom. Inside the marble-tiled restroom, the air was cool and quiet. I wetted a paper towel and began to dab at the stain on her dress. She stood stiffly, terrified, watching me in the mirror. "You have such a beautiful life ahead of you, Sienna," I said softly, scrubbing at the wine. "Patrick seems like a wonderful man. Solid, loyal, the kind of man who builds a future, not just a fantasy. He is," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I stopped scrubbing and looked her dead in the eye through the mirror. My smile was gone. "It would be a tragedy to throw all that away," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Smart women know the value of what they have. They do not trade diamonds for pebbles just because the pebble is shiny for a moment. Do you understand what I mean?" She stopped breathing. She knew that I knew. Her lower lip trembled, and a tear escaped, tracking through her heavy makeup. I, shh, I soothed, returning to my benevolent persona. "They're good as new. You should go back out there. Do not keep your fiancé waiting. Men hate to be kept waiting." She fled the bathroom as if the devil himself were snapping at her heels. I washed my hands slowly, checking my lipstick. When I walked back out, Julian was standing near a pillar, looking green. He saw Sienna running back to Patrick, and then he saw me emerging, calm and composed. He slumped against the pillar, looking like he had just run a marathon. I walked up to him and patted his cheek. "Having fun, darling?" I asked. "The night is still young." The alert from the bank arrived at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. It was a sterile, automated message, but to me, it read like a confession. $50,000 had been transferred from our joint savings account to a high-end jeweler in downtown Seattle. That evening, when I asked Julian about the transaction, he did not even blink. "It is a tech investment, honey," he lied, his voice smooth. "A startup in Silicon Valley. High risk, high reward. Trust me. This is going to double in 6 months. I trust you," I said, my voice equally smooth. I did not block the transaction. I did not scream. Instead, I downloaded the digital receipt and forwarded it to my divorce attorney, Eleanor, under the file name Dissipation of Marital Assets. If Julian wanted to buy his mistress a diamond collar, I would let him, and then I would make him pay for it twice in court. But the money was just the tip of the iceberg. Julian was an architect on a salary, not a millionaire. $50,000 was a significant chunk of our liquidity. If he was spending this kind of money, he was desperate. And desperate men make mistakes. I drove to the headquarters of Blackwood Architecture the next morning. Richard Blackwood, the CEO, was a man I had saved from a nasty sexual harassment lawsuit 3 years ago. He owed me, and he respected me. "Victoria," Richard said, standing up to shake my hand. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Everything okay with Julian. Julian is ambitious," I said, choosing my words with surgical precision. "But I am worried that his ambition might be blinding him to certain ethical lines. I have noticed some irregularities in our personal finances that seem tied to his work with the Harrison Group. I would hate for anything to blow back on your firm." Richard's eyes narrowed. He knew me well enough to know I did not make idle chit-chat. "What are you suggesting?" he asked. "I am suggesting you audit his current projects," I replied. "Specifically, look for any unauthorized transfers of data or intellectual property, just for peace of mind." 24 hours later, Richard called me. His voice was shaking with rage. "You were right," he spat. "The son of a bitch. He has not just been sleeping with the Harrison girl. He has been selling our proprietary designs to a contractor in Bellevue. He is leaking our bids to undercut us, taking kickbacks to fund this lifestyle. He is stealing from you." I confirmed. "I am going to fire him. I am going to sue him into oblivion. I am calling the police." "No," I said, cutting him off. "Not yet, Richard." "What, why?" "Because if you fire him now, it is just a firing. If you wait until I give the signal, it will be an execution. I need you to hold off. Let him think he is safe. Let him think he is winning. Can you do that for me?" There was a long silence on the other end. "Okay, Victoria. But you owe me. When this blows up, I want Vance Strategy to handle the press for free. Deal." That night, Julian came home looking like he had won the lottery. He was practically vibrating with excitement. "Great news, babe," he announced, pouring himself a drink. Blackwood called me into his office. He didn't say it officially, but he hinted that I am in line for a massive promotion. The Harrison project is practically in the bag. He was so delusional it was almost tragic. He mistook the silence of the axe for the peace of safety. "That is amazing, Julian," I exclaimed, walking over to kiss him on the cheek. "You deserve it. You have worked so hard." While he was in the shower, washing off the scent of his own hubris, I went to his study. I knew the code to his private wall safe. He used his birthday. The idiot. I opened it and found the velvet box. Inside lay the necklace, a dazzling cascade of diamonds that had cost $50,000 of my money. I did not take it immediately. That would be theft. Instead, I took a photo of it. Then, the next day, I hired a specialist, a prop master from a local theater company who did side work for my firm. Within 48 hours, he created a perfect replica using high-grade cubic zirconia and cheap alloy. I waited until Julian was at the gym. I opened the safe again. I took the real necklace and slipped it into my purse. I replaced it with the worthless fake. When Julian finally gave that necklace to Sienna, He would be putting a piece of glass around her neck. And when the time came to appraise the assets for the lawsuit, I would produce the real one, proving he bought it, while he would be left explaining why he spent a fortune on a toy. I locked the safe, spun the dial, and went downstairs to make tea. The trap was set. Now. I just had to wait for the mouse to snap his own neck. There is a specific kind of dark comedy found only in the audio feed of a bugged luxury SUV. I sat in my home office, wearing noise-canceling headphones, sipping a chamomile tea while listening to the destruction of my husband's sanity. I had planted the listening device under the passenger seat of his Range Rover 3 days ago. It was a high-fidelity model, capable of picking up even the softest whisper, which meant I heard every pathetic whimper as Julian tried to put the genie back in the bottle. I am going to tell him. Julian. Sienna's voice was shrill, vibrating with the manic energy of a woman who believes she is the heroine of a romance novel. I cannot marry Patrick when my heart belongs to you. We have to be together. I will tell my father that we are in love. I could almost hear Julian's sphincter tighten. Sienna, baby, listen to me. Julian's voice was a masterclass in suppressed panic. You can't just blow up your life like that. Think about the merger. Think about your dad. He would kill me. Literally. I don't care about money, she screamed. I care about us. You said you were unhappy. You said Victoria was cold and controlling. I chuckled softly. I am cold, darling, but I am also the reason he is not living in a studio apartment eating instant noodles. I am unhappy, Julian lied, his voice cracking. But divorce takes time. It is complicated. You have to wait. Just, please, don't break up with Patrick yet. He was terrified. Not of losing her, but of the crushing weight of the Harrison and Sterling families. He was a small, fragile creature who had accidentally wandered into a den of lions. It was time to push him into the jaws. I opened my laptop. I had the video file from the rainy afternoon at the Velvet Bean. I took 3 screenshots, in each one. Sienna's face was clearly visible, her expression one of adoring lust. However, I carefully blurred Julian's face. I did not want to give the game away just yet. I wanted Patrick Sterling, the sharp-witted lawyer, to hunt for the truth himself. A man finds a betrayal more unforgivable when he has to work to uncover it. I created a burner email account and attached the photos. The subject line was simple. She is not who you think she is. I hit send, directing the missile straight to Patrick Sterling's work email. The fallout was faster than I expected. Patrick was not a man who cried over spilled milk. He was a man who soothed the cow. He did not confront Sienna with tears. He hired a private investigator within the hour. By the next afternoon, the engagement was off. It happened quietly, behind closed doors, but the shockwaves rippled through Seattle's high society instantly. The official statement cited irreconcilable differences, but everyone knew that was code for something scandalous. Sienna, stripped of her fiancé and her dignity, went nuclear. That evening, Julian was pacing in our living room, clutching his phone like a grenade. It rang. He looked at me. Terrified. Answer it. Darling, I said. Looking up from my book. It might be work. He walked into the hallway, but he forgot that sound travels. I did not need a bug to hear this conversation. Julian Sienna's voice was loud enough to be heard 3 feet away from the receiver. He knows Patrick knows my father is furious. He has locked me in the house. You have to come get me. You have to save me. I can't, Julian hissed. Are you crazy? I can't come to your parents' house if you don't come. Her voice broke into a jagged sob. If you don't come, I will take every pill in the medicine cabinet. I swear to God, Julian, I can't live without you. I will leave a note, and I will tell everyone it was because of you. Silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. Julian stood there, trapped between a wife who could destroy his career with a phone call and a mistress who was threatening to end her life and pin the blame on him. He was sweating profusely when he walked back into the living room. "Is everything okay?" I asked, feigning concern. "Fine," he croaked. "Just a client with a structural emergency. I might have to go out later." I smiled. He was going to try to save her, not because he loved her, but because he was a coward who was terrified of a suicide scandal. "Be careful." "Julian," I said, turning a page. "The roads are slippery tonight." "I have to go to Portland," Julian announced, throwing shirts haphazardly into his overnight bag. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely zip the suitcase. "There is a structural failure at the bridge site. If I don't go now, the whole project could collapse." It was a terrible lie. We did not have a bridge project in Portland, but I nodded, my face a mask of supportive concern. "Go," I said, handing him his car keys. "Do what you have to do to save the situation." He kissed me on the forehead, a Judas kiss, wet with sweat and fear, and bolted out the door. He thought he was racing to save his mistress from suicide. In reality, he was racing toward his own funeral. I gave him a 20-minute head start. Then, I drove to the address Marcus, my investigator, had provided days ago. It was a luxury apartment in Belltown, a discreet love nest Julian had leased under a shell company. I did not need a key. I had the building manager, whose silence I had bought for $5,000, let me in an hour earlier. When Julian burst through the door of apartment 4B, breathless and frantic, he expected to find a weeping Sienna holding a bottle of pills. Instead, he walked into a tribunal. The living room was brightly lit. Sienna was there, yes, huddled on the cream sofa, her eyes swollen red from crying, but flanking her were her parents. Arthur Harrison sat like a stone statue, his face purple with suppressed rage, while his wife clutched a handkerchief, looking at Sienna with a mixture of pity and disgust. And in the armchair by the window sat Richard Blackwood, Julian's boss, looking at his watch as if he were billing by the hour for this annoyance. Julian froze in the doorway, his bag dropping from his hand with a heavy thud. "What? What is going on?" he stammered, his eyes darting between the terrified lovers and the furious parents. "Mr. Harrison Richard the Bow, I don't understand. Please, take a seat." "Julian," I said. Stepping out from the master bedroom, I held a thick leather binder in my hand. I was not wearing the silk robe I had worn at home. I was dressed in my sharpest power suit, a crisp white blazer that made me look like an avenging angel. Julian whirled around, his knees buckling. "Victoria? How? Why are you—" "Sit down, Arthur," Harrison roared, his voice shaking the walls. Julian collapsed onto the ottoman, looking like a child scolding by the principal. I walked to the center of the room, treating the plush rug like a stage. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice." I began, my voice steady and professional. "I have prepared a brief presentation regarding the current crisis. We can title this meeting Risk Assessment Investment and Personnel Liability." I opened the binder and handed a stack of photographs to Arthur. "Exhibit A," I said calmly. Photographic evidence of an illicit relationship between Julian Vance and Sienna Harrison, taken at the Velvet Bean. This confirms that the breach of contract regarding the morality clause in the Harrison-Blackwood potential partnership was violated 3 months ago. Arthur flipped through the photos, his hands trembling. Sienna sobbed into her hands. Julian opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a finger. "Exhibit B," I continued, placing a digital recorder on the coffee table. I pressed play. Julian's voice, tinny but unmistakable, filled the room. "She is nobody. Just a stupid intern. I will fire her tomorrow. Just, please don't leave me." Sienna let out a wail of anguish. "You said you loved me. You said you were going to leave her." I didn't mean it," Julian cried, looking frantically at Sienna. I was just trying to calm her down. And finally, "Exhibit C," I said, turning to Richard Blackwood, I handed him a file. Bank statements showing unauthorized transfers from our joint accounts, used to purchase gifts for Ms. Harrison, and, more importantly, emails from Julian's private server sending Blackwood Architecture's proprietary blueprints to a rival firm in Bellevue for cash payments. Richard's face went from annoyed to deadly. He scanned the documents, his jaw tightening. "You sold us out," Richard whispered, the sound more terrifying than a scream. "You sold the waterfront designs for, what, $30,000, to pay for this apartment." "No, Richard, let me explain," Julian pleaded, reaching out. "It was a loan. I was going to pay it back." Arthur Harrison stood up. He was a big man, and he moved with surprising speed. He crossed the room and delivered a backhand slap across Julian's face that sounded like a pistol shot. Crack. Julian was knocked off the ottoman, sprawling onto the floor, clutching his cheek. Blood trickled from his lip. "You dirty little parasite." Arthur spat, standing over him. "You seduced my daughter to get to my money. You ruined her engagement for a contract. Mr. Harrison, please," I interjected smoothly. "Violence is a liability. We have better ways to handle this." Richard Blackwood stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked down at Julian with pure contempt. "Julian Vance, you are terminated effective immediately," Richard said, his voice ice cold. "Security is clearing out your desk as we speak. And do not bother looking for another job. My legal team will be filing a lawsuit for breach of contract, theft of intellectual property, and corporate espionage first thing in the morning. By the time we are done with you, you won't even be able to get a job designing doghouses." Julian lay on the floor, looking up at the circle of people who held his life in their hands. He looked at Sienna, who turned her face away. He looked at Richard, who was already texting his lawyer. Finally, he looked at me. "Victoria," he whispered, blood staining his teeth. "Help me." I closed my binder with a satisfying snap. "I am afraid that is outside the scope of my services," I said. The realization hit Sienna like a physical blow. The audio recording of Julian calling her a stupid intern was looping in the silence of the room, peeling away the romantic fantasy she had constructed. She looked at Julian, who was wiping blood from his lip, and her expression shifted from heartbroken to feral. "You used me," she screamed, her voice cracking. You parasite." She lunged at him. It was not a graceful attack. It was a mess of flailing limbs and manicured nails. She clawed at his face, leaving angry red welts across his cheek, screaming obscenities that would have made a sailor blush. Julian, cowardly as ever, curled into a ball, trying to shield his face with his forearms. "Sienna, stop. I can explain," he yelped, but she was beyond listening. "Mr. Harrison made a move to grab her, but I stepped in first. I caught Sienna's wrist in mid-air. My grip was iron. I pulled her back, not gently, forcing her to look at me. "Pull yourself together," I commanded, my voice cutting through her hysteria. "You are embarrassing yourself." He lied to me," she sobbed, her fight draining away as quickly as it had come. "Of course he lied to you," I said, releasing her arm with a dismissive flick. "He is a liar. That is what he does. You are just a victim of your own stupidity, Sienna. But do not mistake your role here. You were the bait, but he was the predator. Save your energy for rebuilding your reputation." She collapsed back onto the sofa, weeping into her mother's shoulder. I turned my back on the pathetic scene and faced Arthur Harrison. He was breathing heavily, his face still flushed, but he was listening. He knew who was really in charge of this room. "Arthur," I said, stepping into his personal space, "we have a problem. If this gets out, the affair, the broken engagement, the corporate espionage, the Harrison name will be dragged through the mud. Your stock prices will plummet. Your investors will flee. It will be a bloodbath." He nodded stiffly. "What do you want?" "Victoria." I can fix this, I said, smoothing the lapel of my blazer. I can bury the story. I will spin the engagement breakup as a mutual decision based on career paths. I will ensure no one ever connects Sienna to Julian. The media will never know she was in that car or at that cafe. And the price he asked? 2 things, I replied, holding up 2 fingers. First, the Harrison Group signs a 5-year exclusive crisis management contract with Vance Strategy. Full retainer, non-negotiable rates. Arthur hesitated for only a second before nodding. Done. Second, I continued, my eyes sliding over to where Julian lay shivering on the floor. You ensure that Julian Vance never works in this state again. You blacklist him from every major development, every firm, every contractor. I want him to be radioactive. I want him to be unable to get a job mixing cement, let alone designing a skyline. Arthur looked at Julian with pure loathing. That will be my pleasure. The deal was struck. I had turned my husband's infidelity into the most lucrative contract of my career. I picked up my binder and turned to leave. The air in the room was suffocating, thick with the smell of ruined lives, and I was ready for fresh air. Victoria Julian scrambled to his knees, reaching out for the hem of my pants. Victoria, wait, you can't leave me here. They are going to destroy me. I am your husband. I stopped and looked down at him. He looked so small. The man I had shared a bed with for 10 years, the man I had built a life around, was nothing more than a frightened child in a ruined suit. Victoria, please, he begged, tears streaming down his face. I have nothing. If you walk out that door, I have nothing. I looked at him for a long moment. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound sense of indifference. You are wrong, Julian, I said softly. You have exactly what you deserve. I walked out the door. I did not slam it. I simply closed it with a soft click, sealing him inside with the lawyers, the furious father, and the consequences of his actions. I walked down the hallway, the sound of my heels rhythmic and steady on the marble floor. As I stepped into the elevator, I pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I had memorized weeks ago. Eleanor, I said when my lawyer answered on the first ring. Victoria, is it done? It is done, I said, watching the numbers on the elevator panel descend. File the papers. Grounds for divorce are adultery and gross financial misconduct. I want him served by the morning. And Eleanor changed the locks on the villa. Tonight. The divorce proceedings were less of a legal battle and more of a surgical extraction. Julian, stripped of his job and blacklisted by the Harrison Group, could barely afford a strip mall attorney who wore ill-fitting suits and smelled of stale tobacco. I, on the other hand, arrived with a phalanx of top-tier litigators who moved in synchronized formation like sharks sensing blood in the water. The cornerstone of my victory was a document Julian had signed 10 years ago, on the eve of our wedding, with a glass of champagne in one hand and a pen in the other. He had been so eager to marry into the Vance name that he had not bothered to read paragraph 4, section C of our prenuptial agreement. It was a standard fidelity clause, but one with teeth. It stated clearly that in the event of proven adultery, the offending party forfeited all claims to marital assets, spousal support, and joint property, Your Honor. Julian's lawyer stammered, shuffling papers nervously. My client contends that the prenuptial agreement is unconscionable. He has become accustomed to a certain standard of living, and to leave him with nothing is punitive. We are requesting monthly spousal support of $5,000. My lawyer, Eleanor, did not even stand up. She simply slid a file across the mahogany table. We are countersuing for the return of $50,000 misappropriated from the joint savings account, Eleanor said, her voice cool and bored. Mr. Vance claimed this money was for a stock investment. In reality, it was used to purchase a diamond necklace for his mistress. Furthermore, We have an appraisal here from an independent gemologist. The necklace currently in the family safe is a cubic zirconia replica worth less than $200. The real diamond necklace is missing, as is the cash." Julian turned a sickly shade of gray. He tried to speak, to spin another web of lies, but the judge silenced him with a sharp look. "Is this true, Mr. Vance?" the judge asked. "Did you spend marital funds on a paramour and then attempt to conceal the asset I was going to put it back," Julian whispered, his head hanging low. The gavel came down like a guillotine. The judgment was swift and absolute. Julian was awarded nothing: no house, no car, no alimony. Furthermore, he was ordered to repay the $50,000 he had stolen, a sum he did not have, to add insult to injury. Richard Blackwood filed his lawsuit the same afternoon, demanding $2 million in damages for corporate espionage and breach of contract. Julian walked out of that courthouse not just single, but destitute and drowning in debt. But I was not finished. 2 days later, the owner of the luxury apartment building in Belltown where Julian was staying the love nest he had rented for Sienna called me. He was panicked because the lease was under a shell company that no longer had funds. He wanted to sell the unit quickly to cover his losses. I bought it in cash that afternoon. That evening, I knocked on the door of apartment 4B. Julian opened it, looking haggard. He was wearing sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, surrounded by boxes of the few belongings he had managed to salvage. "Victoria," he asked, blinking in confusion. "What are you doing here?" "I am the new landlord," I said, handing him a piece of paper. "This is a notice to vacate. You have 24 hours. You bought the apartment." He gasped. "Just to kick me out? It is a good investment market." I shrugged. "And I do not rent to tenants with poor credit scores. Goodbye." Julian. He ended up sleeping on a friend's couch for a week before that friend got tired of his whining. With no references and a reputation that was toxic in the professional world, the great architect Julian Vance had to take the only job he could get. The final twist of the knife, however, was not orchestrated by me. It was a masterpiece of fate. Sienna, cut off completely by her humiliated parents and stripped of her trust fund, had no skills and no degree. She had to work. By a stroke of cosmic irony, the only place hiring immediately was the Velvet Bean, the very cafe where she and Julian had flaunted their affair. One rainy Tuesday, I sat in my car across the street, watching through the window. Sienna was wiping tables, her fiery hair tied back in a messy bun, wearing a brown apron that was 2 sizes too big. She looked exhausted, her youth dimmed by the harsh reality of minimum wage. Then, a delivery scooter pulled up to the curb. A man in a bright yellow rain poncho and a helmet hurried inside to pick up a takeout order for a delivery app. He walked up to the counter, dripping wet, and held out his phone to check the order number. Sienna turned around with a bag of pastries. She froze. The man lifted his visor. It was Julian. For 10 seconds, the world seemed to stop. The former princess of real estate and the former visionary architect stared at each other across the counter. There was no romance left, no passion, no illicit thrill. There was only the smell of wet rain gear, the noise of the espresso machine, and the crushing weight of their own choices. "Order for table 6, Julian mumbled, his voice hollow. Sienna shoved the bag at him without a word, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and regret. He took it, his hands shaking, and turned to walk back out into the rain. I watched him mount his scooter and drive away, a yellow speck disappearing into the gray Seattle drizzle. I started my Porsche, the engine purring like a satisfied cat, and drove in the opposite direction. Justice, I decided, was a dish best served with a side of espresso. 6 months later, the Seattle sky was a brilliant, blinding blue. It was the kind of rare, sun-drenched day that made you forget the gray drizzle ever existed. I sat at a window table in the Velvet Bean. the very same spot where I had filmed the destruction of my marriage half a year ago. But today, the cafe did not smell of betrayal. It smelled of roasted hazelnut and fresh beginnings. I was not hiding in the shadows this time. I was bathed in sunlight, wearing a cream-colored silk blouse that caught the light, reviewing a contract on my tablet. The bell above the door chimed, signaling a new arrival. I glanced up instinctively and felt a strange, detached sensation wash over me. It was Julian. He was wearing a neon yellow vest with a delivery app logo on the chest. His once impeccable hair was hidden under a helmet, and there were dark circles under his eyes that no amount of sleep could erase. He walked to the counter, keeping his head down, looking at the floor as if he expected the tiles to swallow him whole. He did not see me at first, but as he turned to grab a bag of takeout, his gaze drifted and locked onto mine. He froze. For a second, I saw the old Julian, the arrogant architect, try to surface, but it crumbled instantly, replaced by a crushing wave of shame. He looked at my designer sunglasses, my relaxed posture, the aura of unshakable peace surrounding me. He opened his mouth as if to say something, perhaps hello or I am sorry, but his throat clicked shut. He turned away, his shoulders slumped, and hurried out the door without a word. I waited for the anger to flare up. I waited for the satisfaction, the vindictive thrill of seeing him reduced to this. But there was nothing, no anger, no joy, just a quiet, hollow relief. He was not a monster anymore. He was just a ghost, a bad memory that had finally been exorcised from my house. Victoria, a deep, steady voice broke my reverie. I turned to see Patrick Sterling standing by my table. He looked different than he had at the gala. The stiffness was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. He was not just the senator's son anymore. He was a man who had walked through fire and come out the other side with his integrity intact. "Patrick," I said, smiling warmly, "please, sit down." He took the seat opposite me. We were not here for a date, at least not officially. He had reached out to thank me for the tip-off about the affair, and we had realized that my crisis management firm and his legal practice had a lot of synergy. We were discussing a partnership, a new venture to handle high-profile corporate divorces. But as he spoke about liability clauses and media suppression strategies, I saw the way he looked at me. It was not the hungry, desperate look of a man like Julian who needed a savior. It was the look of a man seeing an equal. "You look happy, Victoria," he said, pausing over his coffee. "Lighter." "I am," I replied. I realized that revenge is exhausting work. Living well is much more efficient. When it was time to leave, I raised my hand for the check. Sienna walked over. She looked tired, her hands red from washing dishes, her spark completely extinguished. She placed the bill on the table, refusing to look me in the eye. I pulled out a crisp $500 bill, an obscene amount for a cup of coffee. I placed it on the tray. Then, I reached into my purse and pulled out a small white card. It was the business card for Dr. Arlene Weiss, the best trauma therapist in the city. "Keep the change." "Sienna," I said softly, "and give this woman a call. She works wonders with self-esteem issues." Sienna stared at the money, then at the card. Her lip trembled, but I did not stay to watch her cry. I walked out of the cafe, opening my parasol not against the rain, but to shield myself from the glorious, overwhelming sun. My new car, a sleek Aston Martin, was waiting at the curb. I slid into the driver's seat and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me was not a victim. She was not a scorned wife. She was a queen who had burned down her old castle to build a fortress. I put the car in gear and drove straight into the horizon, never once looking back at the rearview mirror. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to connect with you all. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories. Like this video. And smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.